Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do.
In this episode, I interview Scheree Gilchrist, Chief Innovation Officer at Legal Aid of North Carolina, whose fearless, client-centered approach to scaling justice through technology and AI has transformed how thousands of vulnerable North Carolinians access critical legal services.
Welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm your host, Tom Martin. I'm really thrilled today to have as our last episode of the year, Scheree Gilchrist. She is the Chief Innovation Officer of Legal Aid of North Carolina. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know her very well over the past few years. And I'm delighted to be able to share her story with you today. Scheree, how are you doing?
Hey, Tom, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing pretty good. What are you up to today?
Well, it's a day in the life of my life is kind of crazy. We're in the middle of trying to launch our new intake portal and get that off the ground and also deal with the holidays.
I said it's kind of like you got to hurry up before you can take some time off. Like you got to
Yeah,
accelerate before you decelerate. And it really feels like that at the end of the year, right?
it does. It absolutely does. Trying to cram as much as we can in before December 22nd, really.
I guess, the audience might be interested to know what's the high level, like the very high level concept of what you're working on that's going to be launched.
So what we're working on is, or Justice Hub, it's a one-stop shop for client intake and services and resources. I like to think of it as my chart for legal. It's not quite there yet, but if you think of what that could be, where, somebody who is applying for services at a legal aid program has just anything they need done, they can get it done in their portal, right? So if they need to message their attorney, if they need to upload documents, if they need to chat with Leah, we have Leah integrated into the portal. If they need resources and referrals, and if they need to send an application in for services, all of that can be done within their portal. And it's just a simple, easy, convenient way for them to get help, to get resources, to get services. And it just eliminates so many of the barriers that our clients face when they're trying to communicate with us or get help from the very beginning.
Sounds really convenient. I mean, instead of having to actually have the time to go down to the office, Lance has a few different offices, but even with that, people are working day to day and
Absolutely.
they,
Mhm.
just don't have time to take off. So this would allow them just, 2 a.m. on a Wednesday night.
Exactly. We're meeting people where they are. If it's the middle of the night and they need to get something to us, they can do that. If they need to shoot off a message, that message will be there in the morning for staff when they come in. They'll see it, they respond right away. It's really centered around the client and making client services easy and simple and accessible.
And that's one of the things I really love about working with you and your philosophy, Lance's philosophy of centering it around the client, which means for a lot of us like changing the way we do business because
Absolutely.
it's definitely been, attorney lawyer centric and making it more consumer friendly because clients after all are consumers too.
Yeah. And it's sort of, I guess, become my life's mission. When I started practicing at Legal Aid of North Carolina, one of the things that what struck me was just the circuitous nature of our work as a legal services attorney, because we were dealing just with the legal problems, but our clients come to us as sort of the intersection of legal, social, and other needs. And so because we're only dealing with one piece of it, when they leave us, they come back, right? Because there are other things going on that they need help with. And so I've always questioned, how can we make this better? How can we help our clients? How can we meet them where they are? How can we solve as many problems for them as we can, knowing that we're attorneys and we're not going to be able to address everything, but how can we solve them or at least direct them in the right path or on the right path where they can get help, and they don't fall through the cracks, and they don't have to come back to us 3 months or 2 weeks after we've already helped them because we've set them up for success. So that's kind of been something that has stayed with me since I was just a junior lawyer practicing in one of our rural offices, and it informs a lot of the work that I do now and why I take such a client-centered approach to the work.
Well, it really does shine through. I'm glad that we kind of set it up like this because I definitely want to get back to this on the back half of our
Yeah.
talk. But as the audience knows, I love to get into people's origin stories and find
Uh-oh.
out what makes them tick. So with that, I would love to ask you, Sheree, like I know right now you're in North Carolina. Did you grow up in North Carolina?
No, I didn't. I actually grew up in Jamaica. Well, split my time between Jamaica, New York, and Florida. So my mom has always lived here in the US and my dad lived in Jamaica. And so I've always split my time between the US and Jamaica. But I went to school in Jamaica, went to law school in Jamaica. So I feel more Jamaican. Culturally, I feel really aligned with Jamaica, but the accent isn't quite as strong. Uh, but North Carolina is home.
Yeah, and I'm remembering that there's recently like a hurricane, right? How are things back in Jamaica?
You know, Jamaicans are resilient people. We're warm and friendly and optimistic by nature. I think that's just culturally who we are. And so I think if you were to ask anybody in Jamaica, they will tell you they're doing okay, right? And it could have been worse. It was a category 5, it devastated half of the island. But I guarantee you, if you talk to somebody in Jamaica, they would tell you it could have been worse because lives were spared and people are already rebuilding and things are slowly getting back on track. But it was devastating. It's a small island, and a category 5 direct hit completely wiped out one section of the island. Thankfully, where my dad lives currently was on the other side of the island, and so he was spared. But even for him, he's 88 years old. He's been through every hurricane there is to, and we usually take hurricanes lightly in Jamaica. It's like, it's just a storm. It'll pass. And even for him, it was a traumatic event, and he was not directly impacted at all.
I'm glad to hear that your dad and your family are doing all right. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, it was pretty scary. Category 5. Turning back to your little neighborhood, what was that like? Was it, if you could give us like kind of like a mental picture of going to grade school or something, like what was that like?
So Jamaica is a former English colony, so it's very much based on the English system. So I went to primary school instead of elementary school. And my primary school was right beside my house, so it made it really convenient. I could go back and forth, have lunch at home, go back. The only bad part was my aunt was the principal at my primary school. And so that wasn't always fun. But it was a close, tight-knit community, very much a community-oriented neighborhood. Everybody sort of looked out for each other. We all knew each other. Parents in that neighborhood knew my parents, and you felt like you were sort of being raised by the community in some ways because it was just that atmosphere. I couldn't walk along the street and do anything wrong because before I got home, it would have been reported or somebody would have called me out and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" So that was sort of the environment that I was raised in with my dad as the primary caregiver and my grandmother being a few miles down the road from us.
It sounds like it was a small town kind of feel
Yeah,
to it.
definitely. It was the suburb of Kingston, and it was, I can't lie, it was a really happy childhood for me. I didn't grow up in, the same sort of circumstances that the clients that I am dealing with now grew up in. In a lot of ways, I grew up very privileged, but Jamaica at the time that I was growing up was experiencing its economic downturn. So it was a very strong economy, doing really well. And then between political upheaval and other crisis that were happening, or dollar crashed and it devalued. It felt like overnight. And then that led to a rise in unemployment, and which increased the poverty rate. And then it became sort of this third world country for a while. And so even though I didn't grow up in poverty or experienced poverty, it wasn't too far removed, because all I had to do was drive down the road and I would see the really huge wealth gap. The middle class was completely wiped out in the 80s when I was growing up. It was a very, very small middle class, and you had sort of people who were really wealthy or people who were really poor.
Do you think that's influenced you and like what kind of work you do?
It did. It really did. And I think about it all the time, because when I was in law school, I really was focused on international law, international policy, but I really wanted to work sort of at the UN addressing poverty, like third world poverty. And so it was like this really big macro thinking about poverty and how can you influence policies that address poverty in third world countries. That's always been my framework. When I moved to North Carolina and had to somehow figure out, okay, what am I going to do with my law degree in a new country? I had to figure out how to practice here. And then I fell into legal aid of North Carolina and the work here. That stayed with me. It's still at the core the same concept, right? It's how
Mhm.
do you deal with poverty at a more macro level? I'm looking at big systems change, right? In my role now, how do we address the access to justice crisis that's impacting low income families? So in some odd way, it did work out. I'm still doing the same thing. It's just I just took a different path.
Yeah, and something else that I've been very, impressed by you with is your systems thinking. It's not just tactics, but how to put everything together. I do want to get into that, but I want to get back to you though, a little bit more about you. What was your family like?
It was just me and my brother, older brother, and my dad, and I was the baby. And so my both of them kind of spoiled me, honestly. My dad and my brother took on almost like a paternal role, which he didn't need to, but he really looked out for me. I was like his baby sister to this day. He's still anything you need, he'll take care of me if I needed him to. And then my grandmother, I think, was perhaps the biggest influence on me growing up. She has the most interesting life story, but just a strong woman, just like really resilient and determined and self-made, built several businesses, was an entrepreneur at a time when women weren't supposed to be entrepreneurs. She couldn't have her own bank account. It had to be my dad's name when she started her business,
Huh.
because she was married. And so she put it in my dad's name. So she was a big influence on me growing up, because that's the environment that I grew up in, where, I had this force of nature type grandparent who was running multiple businesses, and this woman who was in charge of men at a time where women weren't in those positions of power. And so she forced me to like question everything. And I think one of the biggest lessons, though, that she taught me growing up, and I think it's been freeing for me, is that really not to worry about what other people think about me or anybody or what I'm doing, because not everybody's going to like me and I'm not going to like everybody else. So just remove that from your thinking. And what that did for me was that it freed me. So I wasn't shackled by other people's opinions of who I am or what I should do or shouldn't do or what I'm capable of or not. I just approached everything as, oh, I could do this. No big deal. I could do it. And so I always had this belief that I could do anything. And then my dad was a very optimistic person. And he just really, for both my brother and I, taught us that there are really very few things that are true failures in life. We have obstacles and challenges and barriers, but how you deal with them is really what defines you. And so if something happens, something he would say to us growing up is that you just pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and you go again. And so, that's sort of been my thinking. If I run into a barrier or a challenge, it doesn't stop me. I just see it as something that, I just need to figure it out and find a way around it, over it, under it, have somebody else help me do that. It's never been anything that's prevented me from doing what I need to do or get done. So I think both my dad and my grandmother really helped me to be bold in a way that I'm very grateful for, is what I should say. I'm very grateful that I had them as influencers in my life.
What a wonderful family to be embraced by, to be cultivated in that way. I think it's wonderful to have examples of people that show you that you can approach life without limits.
Absolutely.
And to see that and to have that example at an early age, it's a huge unlock that unfortunately not everybody is
Yeah.
as fortunate to have that, but it does expand our
Yeah.
minds about what we could do.
And tell me to be curious, right? Don't accept everything just because it's what's acceptable. Be curious. And for me, what that has done throughout my life is curiosity leads to creativity and critical thinking. And then all of those things combined then lead to now, the way I think about innovation, and it leads to change, right? And so teaching me to be curious and to question. I remember when I was 16 and I was a brat, I was a horrible teenager. But my dad was just really patient, and he would let me be me and let me confront and let me ask questions and challenge him. And I remember when I was older and I asked him, I said, why didn't you just tell me to shut up? I was a bratty teenager. And he said, no. He said, you should have the right to express your opinions. I might not like it and we might disagree, but it's my responsibility to teach you or model for you how to deal with that sort of, if he doesn't like it, how to deal with that. And so he let me question everything, even his own authority in some ways. And so again, it was a really unique way to grow up, but it really just expanded my thought process. And as you said, it made everything feel like it was easy, like I could do anything.
Well, I think that sense of possibility married with curiosity and also the last piece from your father of resiliency. Like if
Hmm.
you have those three things combined, you're unstoppable in some ways because,
Yeah.
like you pick yourself up, keep going, and you're going
Yeah.
to figure it out.
And that's what I tell my kids to this day.
Yeah.
Although
Well,
my daughter doesn't appreciate it. She tells me, Mom, just because you say it's going to be okay, it doesn't mean it actually will be.
well, it might be worse if you don't think it's going to be okay.
Right?
What kind of work did your father do?
He worked for Nestle. He was a product manager for Nestle, production manager.
What does that entail, if you know?
So he worked at the Nestle plant and he oversaw their operations, their day-to-day operations, their production.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that title is right. I know it was production. He was in a managerial position. But yeah, so he oversaw their productions of their, in the Caribbean, we have the chocolate milk version of Ovaltine. It's called Milo. So Milo was the Nestle version of that. And some other Nestle products that are unique to Latin America and the Caribbean, Suppligen, which I don't think you have here at all, and some other products.
Well, that might be a hint of where the systems thinking comes from too. But but we're all also our own person. And so I'm just curious how the path evolved to going to law school. When you went to the University of the West Indies and got your law degree, what along the way pushed you down that path? Or is it just something that from like when you were little, you were like, I want to be a lawyer? Or
I have my dad to thank for law school. He said to me that he wanted me to have a career and he wanted me to be able to stand on my own 2 feet and never have to rely on anybody else. He firmly believed that as a woman raising a daughter, that his daughter needed to be self-sufficient. the pathways to self-sufficiency at that point for women, you were sort of pigeonholed into certain jobs. And he just didn't think that was what I should be doing. Like, there's nothing wrong with them, but he wanted me to have what he called a profession, a career. And so he encouraged me to go to law school. I was resistant at first. I thought I wanted to do linguistics and study languages initially. And he said, "This is what I think you should do." And again, my dad's just really cool. He allowed me to do a gap year and he told me, if you can figure out what you want to do between the end of your undergrad and the start of law school, here's your deadline. You can take that year, you can go figure it out. And I traveled, I went to Spain, I lived in Madrid for 3 months and taught English as a second language. And I went to Switzerland and just like traveled and came back. And I couldn't figure out what was next for me. But all the things that I really enjoyed and wanted to do, I could see the connection with law, right? So the things that moved me, like wanting to deal with poverty, the policy changes, all those things that I had been thinking about, it all seemed to connect to law. And so when I got back home and he asked me, he's like, "So did you figure it out?" And I said, "No, that's why I'm back." And he's like, "Good, because you start on Monday," or whatever it was. It was
It's funny. We have that in common too. I took a gap year between undergrad and law school. For me, I worked for a lawyer and tried to see if that's what I wanted to do. And despite the fact that it wasn't the best experience, I ended up still going to law school. So,
No, but the traveling was good for me. I think it helped me to mature. And then when you travel and you see the world and you interact with different people and life circumstances, you get a deeper appreciation for people, and you get to see how systems fail people differently depending on where they are and where they start. So I think it was still very informative.
oh, absolutely, I believe that. That even though at the time, like you told your father that, well, but it does bring you that human perspective.
Yeah.
And by the way, before I jump from law school, like, were there any like amazing influences there? Was there a professor that kind of helped you to take the next step after that, or
My international trade professor really was a big influence because I'd mentioned in the beginning, coming out of law school, I thought I wanted to do international policy and trade and work at the UN and solve third world poverty. And he was a major influence on that. He made international policy, international law, all of that stuff just come together in a way that was really inspirational and motivated me.
was your LLM at Duke, was it focused on that, or
It really wasn't. So again, like most stories, I met a boy, got married, moved to North Carolina, and then had to figure out how to practice law in North Carolina. And thankfully, North Carolina at the time was still allowing students who came from different countries and had a English common law degree to do a 1 year program, a master's level program, and then sit for the bar. And if you pass the bar, you obviously become licensed. And so Duke offered, and there were other schools, but Duke offered an LLM program in just generic American law. I could have tailored that more. I could have done something a little more specialized if I wanted to, but I was more interested in practicing in North Carolina. The American legal system is based on the English common law system. So it's really not that vastly different. Contracts is the same, property law is the same, family law, the principles are all the same, criminal law, the principles are all the same. So it wasn't new information for me. What was new was the Constitution. I had to learn about the Constitution, and rules of civil procedure were different. And then obviously some of the statutes and how the cases have evolved. That was different too. So the classes that I did were centered around constitutional law, civil procedure, evidence, like really core courses. And then I sort of got to pick and choose other things that I wanted to do. I picked a lot of employment law classes because I thought, okay, that might be an easy transition into employment law. And so even then, I wasn't necessarily thinking about legal services or legal aid. I was still trying to figure out other options, and employment law seemed like something that I could more easily transition into than anything else that I had come across. There was no plan to start my career at Legal Aid of North Carolina and still be working
Well,
here 19 years later.
so the masters at Duke kind of like fine-tuned your legal education to American law
Yep.
and the Constitution and all that. And you get licensed in North Carolina. And is Legal Aid of North Carolina your first job after that, or was there something in between?
There was an attorney in Asheville that I did some work for. He ran just a general practice, and I did some work with him. I did some contract work as well, and then Legal Aid of North Carolina.
Well, now you're the Chief Innovation Officer at Legal Aid of North Carolina. Did you start as that?
Yeah, of course, because that role existed 20 years ago. No, I actually started as a part-time attorney doing 16 hours a week. And I like to joke that I have done every single job there is to do at Legal Aid of North Carolina other than be the CEO at this point, because I started just as an hourly staff attorney in the central intake unit. Again, because I was still in the mode of, oh, I got to figure out my life and figure out what my next steps are. And Legal Aid of North Carolina had this part-time position, and I thought, oh, I'll just do this here while I keep looking for my forever job. And so that's what I was doing. So I started out 16 hours a week. And then from there went to staff attorney, supervising attorney. But then my career took an interesting path because of that curiosity and the need to question everything and the need to be creative in how we practice. That led me to do things that weren't necessarily identifiable job roles. I became essentially a projects attorney, whatever that meant. Anything that was new or interesting, or a project that Legal Aid of North Carolina was taking on, they would assign it to me, and I would have to figure out how to develop this project and make it successful and launch it and deploy it and make it work. And so there were all these things that I was allowed to do that had very little to do with the actual day-to-day practice of law, but it really was all about, systemic work. How do you scale services? How do you have bigger impact on the clients that we serve or the communities that we serve rather than, that one-to-one attorney relationship?
Let me ask you this. I think a lot of times people say, okay, and then they'll go along with that. I'm just curious about like how that idea came up, the underlying process of like actually thinking to employ those types of strategies at Lance to be able to scale up and all that. Was that you, or was that in the air?
It was just a combination of the time that we were in. We lost funding from the General Assembly, or they reduced our funding significantly. So, unlike other states, the General Assembly reduced the appropriation for civil legal services in the state. So, we lost our funding. So, we had to start getting really creative about how we practice or how we delivered services and how to source additional resources to fill the gap. And so there were other pots and pools of money out there that we could tap into, but it meant perhaps launching another program or adding in a new component to the work that we were doing. And so that's the sort of thing that I would get assigned to. In the middle of COVID, when all that rent assistance money was available for disbursement, the state of North Carolina came to us at Legal Aid of North Carolina and wanted us to assist with disbursement of the funds. And we had to stand up a whole statewide program to disperse rental assistance funds to people across the state in the identified counties. And that was assigned to me, right? And that meant I had to hire 100 temporary employees. I had to develop a whole system to ensure that we got the applications, reviewed the applications, did the quality assurance, all the way down to turning it over to our finance team to disperse the funds statewide. And all the nuances of that I had to figure out. And I had to hire a team of people to help me. Because if I'm onboarding 100 employees, I'm going to need a team of people to work with me to do that. So I was the project manager for something like, but that's the sort of thing that I would get assigned. When we started doing disaster relief, we had our disaster relief program that wasn't launched by me, it was somebody else. But we were thinking through how could we use technology to train paralegals who wanted to support this effort, or volunteer attorneys who wanted to support this effort but couldn't necessarily travel to the impacted areas, right? And so I was using Zoom. I found out about Zoom, and we were using Zoom to connect our paralegals and volunteers to survivors of hurricanes of past. I was introduced to Teams, and I was using Teams. We were looking at Facebook Live as a way to spread information. So it was just all these different things that would get assigned to me to figure out long before, people were really looking at utilizing technology in that way, or, you know, thinking beyond just the direct legal services in the context of landlord tenant, and really thinking about rental assistance as a core component to resolving evictions.
A couple things. Like one is that why the drive to scale or be more efficient came about. It sounds like with a lot of things, necessity is the mother of invention.
Mhm.
But also, I'm just curious, the rental assistance thing statewide. Like some people, when handed that project, would be like, "Oh no, that's not within my job description. I do this, I don't do that." Like, or flat out refuse because of like the imagined
Yeah.
workload. What is it in you that is like, I can do this, I'll figure it out? Some people might have like preconceptions about all the things would go wrong, which prevents them from moving forward. How do you view it?
Like I said, it's the fearlessness and that was instilled in me when I was a child. Like I wasn't it didn't scare me. It was more of a challenge. Like I was, oh, this seems like something interesting to do. And oh, the benefit of that is really going to be exponential, right? So it's like that traditional legal training and maybe way of thinking versus real client realities and how do you solve problems. And this new program that we're implementing sounds like something that could solve a problem, because we're in the middle of, for example, with the rent assistance thing, a housing crisis. And that crisis could not be solved just with the traditional lawyer work of going to court and preventing an eviction, because that was, at the end of the day, just one piece of the problem. People needed money in their hands because we're in the middle of COVID. People weren't working. They weren't able to have the income that they used to have to be able to pay their rent and bills. So, in thinking about the rent assistance program, for me, it was real client realities and how we can make a difference in their lives, as opposed to the big challenge of this project is daunting and overwhelming. And it was all those things. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a martyr by any sense. It was challenging and it was overwhelming at times too. But I think my thoughts went directly to the clients and how this would help them and how this would really scale the work that we're doing, because we could support them in multiple ways now, as opposed to looking at it from me, Scheree, oh my gosh, this is something that is going to overwhelm me or take over my life.
That does help me to make sense of it, because like if you have that the vision of the benefit to people, helping people, if that's the frame, the goal,
Hmm.
then you don't get caught up in the how of getting there, which is a selfish, like, not necessarily in a bad way. Like we all have stuff going on, it takes the frame from like the lawyer-centric version of it to
Yeah.
focusing on clients.
And what you learn, I think, doing this work is doing good work one person at a time is not enough, right? The need is so vast, it outstrips our ability to keep up with it. And so doing good work one person at a time is needed. I'm not saying we need to completely do away with it, but it's not enough. We have to do more. And so at that time, that was an example for me, anyways, of here's one more thing that we could do and help more people, as opposed to that individual going to court, filing paperwork, preventing that one eviction. I could disperse thousands of dollars to help people stay housed in an entire housing development. And so that's just a distinction that I was making in my mind when I was thinking about it.
Yeah. How can you multiply the effective good on people?
Hmm.
So let's turn a little bit to, of course, technology, but also, AI and how it can help. Do you think it can help access to justice?
Absolutely. We're sort of in this interesting time, right? I think we're in the time of the next revolution type moment. I think that's where we are with AI. I think the world is going to look so much different once we come out on the other side of it. In the same way that when people went through the industrial revolution, the world looks so much different. But I think AI offers us an opportunity that we never had before as legal services providers to scale, to get access to technology to help us to meet the demand for services, to immediately remove barriers to access that were previously insurmountable for us, right? You take a program like Legal Aid of North Carolina, we operate statewide, we have multiple offices, but each one of those offices serves at least 5 or 6 surrounding counties, and there you have attorneys that are driving an hour, hour and a half to court to assist one person.
Hmm.
You have an AI tool that can overcome the geographic barrier, right? So they don't necessarily have to drive to meet their client to get documents or the way lawyers traditionally used to practice. You have the AI that can meet the client where they are. It can explain information, help them complete the documents on their own. And, you have this way now of working with your clients regardless of where they live. And I'm not saying like something like this, like Zoom, you couldn't have that exchange over Zoom, but you couldn't fill out a form. The self-help component of it that you could do where you're supporting your client was just not there with something like this. And AI overcomes that. I'll use the example of Leah. No matter where anybody lives in North Carolina, whether they're in the western part of the state or the eastern part of the state, 5 hours from Raleigh, one direction, 2.5 hours from Raleigh, the other direction, they can access legal information just by going to our website, going to a library, logging on. They can get access to basic information about their rights. And before, they wouldn't have been able to gain that access, right? We would have had to have strategically planned to do an outreach in some further counties or the counties that are really the true legal deserts in our state. We would have had to set up some sort of outreach session, drive out there, do a table in and explain this along with a community partner. Whereas now people can just go onto our website and get that information and have it at the time that they need it. They're not bound by our schedules and when we're available to show up to do that outreach event. Leah is available 24/7, 7 days a week. They can just access it, get the information they need, ask follow-up questions if they have it, and get resources if it's not something we can help. And that's just kind of the lowest level use of AI right now, right? Because now you have the agentic models and it just keeps developing it. The opportunities that will bring is even more significant. And then when I think about the tech piece and the access to technology, if I were going to introduce a tech solution in legal aid in years past, it meant thousands of dollars,
Mm.
hundreds of thousands of dollars, and resources that we just wouldn't have access to. And it's the reason legal services has always lagged behind. It's not because people aren't creative or inventive or innovative. It's because we just didn't have the resources, and the tech was not accessible to us because it was so expensive to purchase or use. But now it's not, right? Anybody can use AI, anybody can build on AI. We're just living in a different time. The opportunities, I think, are unlimited at this point, and there are risks. I'm aware of that. Again, I'm not an AI idealist, but I think the opportunities are definitely worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think when you look at it the way I think we both do, is that here's the goal that could benefit people and help people. And then you just try to find the strongest, quickest way to get to that goal, and then of course you build in the guardrails and safety that you need to along the way. But
Mhm.
getting there is really important. And so you don't get, bogged down by all of the what ifs.
What ifs are just barriers. I mean, we can what if something to death. Sometimes you just have to take a risk and just go for it. And,
Just dive
so
in.
what? If it doesn't work out, it's not the end of the world. You just move forward.
Well, let me ask you a couple questions that I ask all my guests. The first one is to be helpful to the audience because I know that if it hasn't come across in everything that Sheree's been talking about, she has a lot going on. I'm just curious, how do you keep it all up in the air? How do you balance it? How do you keep things steady?
Are you asking if there's work-life balance, Tom?
Yeah, is that possible? Is that a fantasy? How do you do it?
Should I be honest or should I give
Please.
the canned response? This is my opinion. There is no work-life balance. There is prioritizing, and what takes priority that changes day to day. So, there are days that I work 12 hours. There are times that I work all weekend long. There are times that I work all night long just to meet a deadline or get things done. But there are other times that I stop, I take time, I'm hanging out with my family, we're going on trips and vacations, and I prioritize that time as well. So I don't know if that's balance, right? I think it's just a matter of prioritizing on any given day what's important for that day. And family's always important and family's always first. But I don't know that you can achieve full balance. I think something always gives. I also have a lot of help. I have a very supportive husband. He lets me be me and do my thing, and he'll pick up the slack where he can. But we also have other support systems around us so that things don't fall through the cracks. But again, that's not balance. That's just juggling priorities.
Yeah, the question gets me too, because balance it implies like a static, balance.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, it's really a rhythmic, dynamic thing about how we.
Yeah. I think it's a disservice for anybody who is driven and successful, and that drive allowed them to be successful to then say, oh, you should have work-life balance. Because I guarantee you, if you look at their path to success, there was no balance on that path to success because the attention and the time that it takes to really achieve your goals, you have to go all in. There is no halfway of doing that. Not that I've seen, anyways. Not any examples that I've seen, and from my grandmother to other mentors that I've had, and other successful people that I've been around. The story arc is the same, and that's athletes, that's entrepreneurs, that's anybody. That story arc is the same. You cannot realize a goal without a full investment and commitment to get into that goal. But I think along the way, you have to figure out, how do you juggle? How do you manage your priorities? What sort of support system you need to have around you? Who's helping you pick up the pieces when you don't when you're not available. And I think that's the story that needs to be told. But to tell somebody, especially younger people coming out of law school or people who are studying whatever their career path is, to say, to achieve this goal that you will have, this sort of balanced life. I think
Mhm.
that's not true. And people will disagree with me. I'm sure people will see this and they will say, no, that's not right. And we should be advocating for work-life balance. And yeah, I agree with you. That's the ideal, but I don't think it's realistic right now to say that.
I agree with you. I think those are great words of advice, and I know they will benefit the audience. The last question I have really ties into that, which is in doing all the things that you do throughout your career now, what makes it worthwhile for you?
I think at the end of the day, it's still the people that we serve. I get a lot of satisfaction from solving problems for people who I know we're their last hope in some situations, right? I look at our clients and the people that we work with, but for legal aid attorneys and others who are willing to give up their time, pro bono volunteers and others who are willing to give up their time and efforts, you're talking about people who would have absolutely no access to basic legal information, no access to the courts, and just they would be stuck in an endless cycle of poverty. And I think the work that I'm doing in working towards making that better and solving that problem gives me a lot of satisfaction. I don't really care so much about the titles and the things that happen because of the work that I'm doing. I get really focused on how does this help our clients and our communities, and how is this moving people out of poverty? Are we doing good work? So, the process, the design, the tech tools, all of that for me, they're not distractions, or they're really purpose driven, strategic things that I'm doing because I'm really, like I said, focused on the end goal of helping people gain better access to legal services.
Well, I think that's a wonderful goal. And I just
Yeah.
want to thank
And
you
it's
for all of your efforts in achieving that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Nobody's ever done an interview like this with me, so I appreciate you taking the time to get to know me a little bit better.
Well, absolutely. I know I have learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience has learned a lot too. So thank you so much for being on my show.
Thank you, Tom.
For all of you out there that want to follow up with you and learn more about Scheree and Lance, how can they do that?
You could email me or call me. We could share that out. Yeah, I'm easily accessible. Anybody who knows me knows you could text me or call me. Always happy to help and share whatever knowledge I have and resources that I have, not gatekeeping anything over here. So, however I can be of assistance, just feel free to reach out.
And they could always go to Legal Aid of North Carolina, right?
And they could do that too.
And they could donate too if they want.
And you could donate too and help us do the work that we're doing.
Well, thanks again, Sheree.
Thank you.
Thanks to all of you for watching. I so appreciate you. Given this is the last episode of the year, I just want to say happy holidays, happy new year, and I'll see you on the other side.
Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.